Now, we spoke about the research you did. You said you interviewed a lot of experts in the field.
Yeah.
What did they have to say when it came to the theories of these, for lack of a better term, racist claims?
Okay, so in terms of science, firstly, the race is at most a kind of convenient shorthand description, but really it has no scientific basis. The genetic variance within the so-called races is often much greater than that between them. So within Africa, you have much more genetic variation than you do, say, between European and Indian populations, say in Eurasia, and it's because only relatively small groups migrated to Asia and then Europe. So there was much more genetic variation in Africa. So the idea of race then is fallacious in a scientific sense. It's all it's describing are very superficial characteristics, skin color, hair type, things like that. But that's not profound in terms of your whole genome. So that's the first point that scientists will make. So then one looks at different population groups, and that's a term that scientists use more often rather than races. So you look at different population groups, and indeed there is some variation between them. So for example, people who live in malaria zones, there are more people who have sickle cell anemia there. And the result of that is because if you have one allele of a particular gene, then that protects you against malaria. So Pesachs in the Jewish community, lactose tolerance, we evolved for that, skin color. So those, in that sense, there has been continued evolution of humanity. But all of those are single gene mutations, whereas intelligence involves a network of thousands of genes. So you're not comparing like to like, because one of the racist arguments is that, look, people have evolved for skin color, people have evolved for sickle cell anemia, therefore what's to say they're not evolving for intelligence? And the answer to that is that you're not, it's trying to compare apples and oranges. Wow. Or fish and bicycles. Yeah.
Now, as we see in the book, the study the racist study keeps popping up in different forms year after year, and you speak about the bell curve. Now, this was published in 1994. Can you talk us through what exactly the bell curve set out to prove?
Okay, the bell curve was, as you say, a book that came out in America in 1994 with huge publicity. And what it was arguing, it was, the two authors were arguing, was that the reason people were poor was because they were stupid, basically. They had low IQ. So it wasn't the other. Most people say that the reason people in poorer areas have lower IQs relates to poverty. But they were saying, no, it's the low IQs were causing the poverty. And the corollary of that, they said, was the reason in America why there were more poor black people was because they said that black people are innately less intelligent than white people. So that was the core argument. Look, it was a long book. There were lots of other stuff in it, but that's the kind of core argument of the racist section of the book. And in common with a lot of this kind of people who hold this kind of view, they believe that IQ is something that is biological, so that how you score on an IQ test is a reflection of your innate intelligence. So, I mean, the arguments against that are, if we take separated identical twins who've grown up in different class backgrounds, their IQs sometimes vary by as much as 30 points. Wow. So it's clearly there's a very strong environmental element to it. And what we also know is that each generation, average IQ scores get higher. So in order to keep a mean of 100, it's supposed to be the average, they have to make the IQ test more and more difficult. Now, people are not genetically changing, but what is changing is their exposure to abstract logic. So at the moment, like kids, for example, who play like Tetris or Grand Theft Auto or whatever, they're dealing with abstraction and with concepts in a way that will help them in IQ tests, and that has been demonstrated. So the reason why different population groups might have different average IQs has nothing to do with genetics. What it has to do with is the kind of exposure, particularly in early childhood, that they've had to abstraction.
Happy Saturday. I am Joseph Ward. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. And if you are watching this, I appreciate you for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and share this video, share this channel, share this information, because we get it in over here and we really tackle the topics that need to be tackled for the Black community, for us to make sure that we can change as much as we can to have as bright a future as we can make for ourselves, because it's going to be on us to make the future that we want for us. So comment, subscribe, share, hit that like button, because if you don't hit that like button, then you don't like Black people. Joe Biden told me to tell you. So if you are watching this video, thank you. It is Saturday, and of course, this is not live because I am in Bennettsville, South Carolina for the Country Style Cook-Off, for the supporting the Country Style 2 YouTube channel, irvineP. So I love that content. Been wanting to go to the Country Style Cook-Off for a while, so I am there. But I appreciate you for tuning in to this, because, hey, I want to make sure that I leave you with something good. So we are getting it in. Okay, so you saw the clip opening up. The gentleman, I forgot the gentleman's name. It was on the screen. You saw it. But and I gotta do better remember them names, but hell, I don't remember the name. But basically, he wrote a book, and in the book he was citing and or refuting the idea of Black inferiority when it comes to intelligence, as you saw him explaining, right? Because the theory of the white racists, the white supremacists, is Black people are inherently inferior. We're inherently inferior when it comes to intelligence, and we're inherently inferior when it comes to genetics. And as a matter of fact, we're not even the same type of human that they are. We're a subhuman species, an inferior human species, not the same as them. And that's why it's okay for them to dominate us and treat us the way that they treat us. That's the reason why racism exists. So I want to start off with that clip to kind of get your palate wet, because I'm getting into a debate. We're going to watch a debate between Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and Dr. William Shockley. And William Shockley is trying to prove that Blacks are inferior, and eugenics is something that needs to be employed either on the Black community or within the Black community to rid us of the so-called weak ones. Because of genetics, we have produced weak people. How many weak people? I don't know. We're going to get into it, but it's going to be a good debate, good conversation that we're getting into. Of course, you know, I'm going to be giving my piece, giving some information on it, because I got my computer in front of me, did my research, I'm ready for this. I got my water. And we want to talk about this, though, because the racist propaganda is what helps white supremacists continue to eliminate Black people and propagandize Black people, which will lead to the further elimination or the suppression of any gains that Black people would make en masse. Of course, we know the few pets will eke through the system, but for the most part, the majority of Black people, we are seen as something that could be a blockade to white supremacy really flourishing the way it's supposed to in their eyes. So they want to make sure that they suppress us. And I remember in the early days of America, America was Black and white. You had Native Americans, which numbers greatly dwindled. You had a few Asians, numbers were not vast, right? So America was mostly Black and white. And we were the thorn in the side, or the nemesis to the white population. Of course, things have changed now, but we are still a nemesis or in competition to all other groups. But before all of these things happen with these other groups today, we were dealing with white people and their racist ideologies. And remember, what we're also gonna highlight and get into is the racist history of the sciences, how a lot of these social sciences were developed in America, and the racist history of the medical industry in America. Because of the idea that Black people were not human, Black people didn't feel pain, Black people were genetically inferior, an inferior subspecies of human. So because of this, we can experiment on them. A lot of the scientific advancements that were made were due to the inhumane studies, quote unquote studies, but the inhumane treatment of Black people in these laboratory environments, in these torture environments, in these terroristic environments that they use to so-called advance science and learn more about humanity, the body, the brain, and all these other things, all these other sciences, rather, that they were able to produce in the 18 and 1900s. So I've said my piece. Let's get into it. Let's let Dr. Welsing teach this young man something, and then I'm gonna drop my pieces into it. So remember to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. I appreciate you all for tuning in, even though this is not live. You know, I'll be back live next Saturday. So let's go.
Back in the 70s, a man named Dr. William Shockley, a noted scientist, embarked upon the mission of proving to the world that Black people are genetically inferior, without, I might add, the benefit of any formal background in genetics.
That's that white audacity. That's that white audacity. No formal background in genetics. Did a little bit of research, came across some information, and is bold enough to step out into the mainstream and promote the idea of Black inferiority and, you know, Black people not being on the same level as white people. The audacity, the caucasity, rather, the caucasity.
He became front page news and won headlines with his controversial views. On campus after campus, unrest followed his every visit. My position then and now is that if a supremacist cannot be rationally debated, perhaps he has a point. After the debate you're now going to see, Dr. Shockley went back into oblivion. I don't claim that the 1973 interview did it alone, but I am of the opinion that it helped. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, Racial Superiority with Dr. William Shockley. We have two very prominent educators, scholars on Black Journal tonight, and we feel that it is important to defend the First Amendment rights of all Americans. Dr. William Shockley, one of our guests, has had quite a difficult time speaking at some universities, and particularly some Black college students do not agree with his theories. On Black Journal, we feel that Dr. Shockley's rights in the First Amendment area are parallel to Black people's rights. That is, that Dr. Shockley must have a platform for his views if Black people are to have a platform for their views. Dr. Cress Welsing, on the other side, has difficulty in expressing her views on legitimate mass media outlets because many whites do not agree with her theory of genetics. Now let's find out what the controversy is about. Dr. Shockley, please give us the benefit, basically, of what your theory is.
My principal point, Mr. Brown, is not so much a theory of black-white differences, but is summed up in one word, which is the theme of my appearance on your program and my efforts, and the word is dysgenics. And dysgenics means effectively downbreeding, retrogressive evolution. And I fear that this is worst for the Black community, and I particularly welcome an opportunity to appear on Black Journal just for these reasons. And let me say also that when I first met Dr. Welsing, it was not Black students who were disrupting, but white students. And Dr. Welsing made a very sincere and I thought extremely effective effort, a well-planned effort. It was not effective with these white students at Staten Island Community College, so I would have a chance to speak. In fact, I think they prevented her from saying what she wanted to say when she was trying to gain me a platform. So my main theme is that we have problems that we should face and we should look at connected with dysgenics, and I welcome any opportunity I have to bring this out so that people can look at it and worry about it.
So I looked up dysgenics, and dysgenics is exerting a detrimental effect on later generations through the inheritance of undesirable characteristics. So he's hinting at dysgenics being something that has afflicted Black people, and is one of the reasons why we have the undesirable characteristics that we have, because of our genetic dysfunction as a people. That's what he's getting at. Wow. Okay.
Dr. Shockley, you are accused of having a theory that is a white racist theory. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I've considered whether or not I am a racist. Racist is an epithet that used to damage my self-esteem, but it doesn't anymore. I feel it's untrue. If you look in the dictionary as to what racist means, it means emotional feelings, irrational feelings associated with fear and hate. If I really had those, I don't think I would be here this evening. I feel that what I'm engaged in is a demand for diagnosis, and I'd like to say some more about this chart, which we'll come to probably later, which shows the disproportionate rates of reproduction for the least effective elements of the Black community.
So before he gets into that, so let's deal with racism. Let's get a little foundational stuff. Let's go to Merriam-Webster and see what racist. And so racist is of relating to or characterized by racism, such as having, reflecting, or fostering the belief that race is a fundamental detriment of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce the inherent superiority of a particular race. So according to Merriam-Webster, he is racist. He is pushing racist ideologies. He is enacting racist, because racism is not only ideas, but it is ideas acted upon, because you have the ability to act upon those ideas. So the fact, remember in the beginning, Tony Brown was talking about Dr. Shockley with his false and racist ideas was accepted by the mainstream media, while Dr. Welsing with her ideas that countered the racist ideas was not accepted by the white media, the white mainstream media. So Shockley was actually given a platform by the system to push his ideas of Black genetic and intellectual inferiority. He was given a platform, so he has the ability to act upon his ideas and his theories, which makes him a racist. It's the definition of racism. So let's get a little history, right? It says, so, you know, I did a little chat GPT on what is racism and talking about the history of scientific and medical racism in America. But before we get into that, let's get into racism, right? And the concept of race. We talked about this before, but let's get into it, right? The concept of race was created as a tool to justify inequality, exploitation, and domination, particularly during the rise of European colonialism, the transatlantic slave trade, and global imperialism. It is not a biological fact, but a social construct invented to divide humanity into hierarchical categories based on physical characteristics, most notably skin color, right? So it says in the 15th to 19th centuries, European powers began enslaving Africans and colonizing large parts of Africa, the Americas, and Asia. To morally and legally justify the enslavement of millions of Africans and the violent takeover of the indigenous lands, European thinkers developed the idea that non-Europeans were inferior, subhuman, or civilized. Africans were described as naturally suited to enslavement, physically strong, but intellectually weak based off the physical characteristics, right? Indigenous people were labeled as savages, needing Europeans to control or civilize them. By creating a hierarchy of races, with white Europeans at the top, colonial and slave-holding societies could rationalize their brutal practices as part of a natural or divine order. So they literally believed, they were indoctrinated and codified the belief that they were the genetic and intellectual superior race on earth, and all other races need to be subdued and colonized by them and taught the ways of the white man, because if it was different, it was wrong. If it wasn't white, it wasn't right. So I don't know what he's talking about. He's categorically wrong. He's wronger than a mug. He's out here talking that bull, right? But once again, he's acting as if he don't understand what he's doing. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say he's full of shit. And he acted like he don't know what he's doing. He acting like he don't really understand that he's pushing racist ideologies, when in fact, that's all he's doing. That's the root of what he's doing, to push the racist ideologies of genetic inferiority, and to even imply that eugenics should be employed to weed out the bottom feeders. Like, that's crazy. But let's jump back into it. Hit that like button. Make sure you hit that like button, because we cooking today. Let's get back into it.
I'd like to say more about that than we should in just this brief introduction. But I think there is another word that better describes what I'm involved in, and that word is raceology, which means a scientific analysis of racial differences. And I basically have a faith that reason is a good thing, and I feel as you do about the First Amendment, but maybe with a slightly different emphasis. I think the really important thing about the First Amendment is it is a way of guaranteeing a high likelihood that truth will emerge as a result of conflicting ideas being expressed, and I have a thesis and a basic belief that truth is a good thing and will be of benefit to man.
Thank you. Dr. Francis Welsing, give us the benefit of your theory.
Get him, Dr. Welsing.
Well, my theory was, I wrote the paper in 1969. I wrote a paper called The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. And the sole reason behind writing that paper was an attempt to understand the behavior of white people in relationship to all people of color, every place in the world, black, brown, red, and yellow people. And the paper was presented to the Americans at the National Medical Association, the section on psychiatry in neurology, because back in 1969, the Black Caucus in the American Psychiatric Association, we had said that racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people. That racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. Right. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior. And the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people, I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Francis Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists.
And I just want to stop it right there, not to cut her off, but stop it right there. But remember, that's the fear of genetic annihilation is a hill that Dr. Welsing proverbially died upon, basically saying that is one of the main forces behind the system of white supremacy, is the fear of genetic annihilation, because white people, especially white people in America, because of their proximity to the black population in America and the vast growing population, or just the population period, the black men could breed them out. And so you have to keep the black men in check. You have to keep their sexuality in check. You have to keep their mentality in check. Keep those black bucks in check. Break those bucks. And then once that happens, the women and children are vulnerable, so you can impose yourself. And then you can socially engineer the women and children to what you want them to become, and then come back and socially engineer the men into what you want them to become once you've broken the buck. And therefore, it can help you to further dominate and maintain the system of white supremacy. So, yeah.
Is that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color, and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior, because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
may I take a call?
Oh, sure,
all
please.
Right. Let me.
So while they cutting in, I wanna say my piece, because I do think her theory has truth. I'm not going to say that is the whole truth of why white people act the way they act, but I believe that's an important puzzle piece into us understanding the system of white supremacy and the mind of the white supremacists, right? Because racism, the concept of racism was literally used as a tool to shape societies across the world. Let me read this to you. Racism, often perceived solely as social or moral, as a social or moral issue, was institutionalized and reinforced by scientific and medical authority throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. We're talking about systematic implementation of social engineering, social control, and social domination based on the idea of genetic superiority, because black people need to be tamed. They need to be handled. Black people need to be handled, right? In the American context, racism was not only a social political tool for subjugation, but a legitimized framework within the highest academic and scientific circles. The result was a deeply embedded belief in white superiority and black inferiority, which justified slavery, colonialism, segregation, and unethical experimentation, because there has to be a why behind the slavery. Racism followed slavery. Slavery happened. Oh, well, we gotta make it look like what we're doing is justified and even ordained by the Lord. It's ordained by God. God said for us to tame these Negro animals, right? So all this propaganda and all these narratives were created to justify that these jungle-dwelling savages needed to be tamed by the white man who doesn't bathe, carry around diseases, has sex with animals, have sex with other humans, have sex with younger humans, kill themselves, ravage themselves, grape themselves. The practice of genetics was first practiced upon themselves. The Black Plague follows them. Nastiness, like filth, destruction, all these things follow them. But we are the inhumane ones, right? So it had to be justified scientifically. Racism had to be justified scientifically. So some of the scientists, and you've heard me say this before, but we're going to hammer this home. Some of the scientists that were behind the implementation of the concepts or the theories of racism. One was Carl Linnaeus and the taxonomy of humans in 1735, right? He was a Swedish botanist in System of Nature, classified humans into subspecies based on continental ancestry and attributed moral and behavioral traits to each group. right? Europeans were described as governed by laws, while Africans were crafty, lazy, and governed by caprice. This taxonomy marked the beginning of racial pseudoscience. Black people are lazy, crafty, governed by caprice. They just willy-nilly all over the place and need somebody to come crack a whip on their back and teach them naked Negroes how to act. They eat with their hands. They loud. They be dancing. They got big butts, big breasts. They got long penises. What's wrong with these black people? Because these white supremacists have an obsession with the black man's penis, right? That's why they're always talking about penis size. And Dr. Welsing even gets in the ISIS paper, their obsession with the black male phallus. And their obsession with the phallus is, according to her, because of their fear of genetic annihilation. If you attack that and take that away, if you dominate that, then it can't eliminate you, right? And then she even went as far as say the gun was their great equalizer because they don't have the swinging thing. You heard me? And so start with Carl Linnaeus, right? The taxonomy of humans. Then you go to Johann Friedrich Blumenbach and the Caucasian ideal, right? He was a German anatomist in the late 18th century. He introduced the term Caucasian and created a racial hierarchy of 5 human types, placing Caucasians at the pinnacle. He used skull measurements to claim European superiority and African inferiority. So the early days of saying, hey, scientific science shows us, look at the size of the skulls. Because if you cock your head like this and close your eyes and then open them just slightly, and then put your hands like this, you can see that the skull sizes are different. And thus, because of the frontal, the slope of the frontal lobe and the swoop into the nostril cavities shows that the European is thus more superior than the African because his mandibular cavity does not overhaul the mitochondrial contextual supplementation of the encasing of the African brain. Thus, the neurons and the dendrites don't fire off how they're supposed to, thus rendering the African genetically inferior and intellectually inferior. My brother, the science don't lie. The science does not lie, my brothers and sisters. And then it gets in talking about scientific racism moving into the 19th century, right? Samuel George Morton, an American physicist, collected over 1,000 skulls to argue that white people had larger cranial capacity and therefore intelligence is more intelligent than other races, especially the black race. Because, hey, man, once, like I just broke it down, if you take a drop of water and put it in this bottle cap, it will represent the cranial capacity of the black man, but the water inside of this total bottle represents the cranial capacity of the white man. That's what they sound like. Because if I can create the narrative, if I can control the education and create the narrative, I can make you believe anything I want about yourself. And you will never know the truth about yourself, because Dr. Welsing hit on something. The projection of the idea of genetic inferiority, because she talked about genetic recessiveness. She's hinting on genetic recessiveness. He's hinting on genetic inferiority. And she's saying genetically, realistically in life, you are recessive. And he's saying, well, I believe in real life, you are genetically inferior, but the recessiveness is there. The inferiority isn't there. One more thing, then I'm gonna get back into it, right? Joshua Knott and George Giddens, in their book, Types of Mankind, published in 1854, argued that different races were separate species, differently opposing to the idea that all humans shared common ancestry. So the idea that different races are different species has been debunked by nature. Remember, nature has already showed us what happens when two separate species come together and mate. When two separate species come together and mate, can an offspring be produced? Yes. But will that offspring be able to reproduce? No. Nature ain't crazy. Nature said, we ain't making these phalluses just run all willy-nilly and keep on reproducing themselves. So an example is the liger, the lion who has mated with the tiger, or the tiger who's mated with the lion. So when that offspring is born and it reaches maturity, it still doesn't reach sexual maturity because it can't reproduce. It doesn't have the ability to reproduce because that wasn't formulated and during the gestation process. Nature has put things in place to not just let stuff just. Imagine a liger running around here in nature. No, man, no. So let's get back into it because we debunking this stuff.
So that, because we have a number of calls, and we'll see what the public wants to find out also. Just 1 second. Hello, go ahead, please. You're on Black Journal.
Yes, thank you. I would like to ask the question, why does the doctor feel that his theory, Dr. Shockley, why did you feel that your theory is correct?
Well, let me say that's a long question. Let me point out one aspect. I mean, it's a question that calls for a very long answer. I think I might just at this point say that in a time like 1 hour, we may expose a problem and encourage thinking about it, and this is a very valuable thing. But to cover either Dr. Welsing's views or mine, and let me say here are, just to show that these things exist, is a pamphlet that she was good enough to give me some time ago.
This one's upside down.
Well, that one's upside down. Yeah, thank you.
Right.
And this is one of my own. It's actually a collection of a debate.
The imperatives of ethnic education is yours.
This is the issue of the journal. Mine was, the title of my paper is somewhat different from this, but I want to say that speaking for myself, if people would like to write to me at Stanford University, I have a post box there, post box S, which is the same as Shockley and Stanford. I will try to supply more information, and I'm sure Dr. Welsing will say what she can do about making, telling people how to reach her pamphlet. Okay. But now let me say this chart that I held up a moment ago is very important in respect to this question of why I think there may be what proves a basic difference. But I'm going to say that if there were not a basic difference in intellectual capacity in the past, there probably will be a basic difference between black and white intellectual capacity in the future, simply because of the reproduction patterns. And these are Census Bureau data, and this is the most threatening aspect. And what it indicates is that for the black women of the lowest intellectual social class, which are rural farm women, generally the education is least, the average number of children is 5.4. For women with college degrees, it's 1.9. And so this is definitely unfavorable. It is reproducing far more at the bottom end and not enough to keep even at the top end.
Dr. Shockley, can
for
you
whites,
explain?
let me just finish this. For whites, the numbers are also in this direction, but nowhere nearly as severe.
Dr. Shockley, I think that in all fairness, you should explain to the audience why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the time that you're showing this, who is keeping black people in a situation like they're in? I mean,
yes. Explain why the disparity, especially at that time, between black people on farms and black people in college, right? Because there's a reason for that, but also, you know, just people are going to produce more children living on farms because of the workload that needs to happen. And we already know that no matter the race, if you go to college, the higher the education, usually the lower amount of children en masse, you know, the average, right? But going back to the first clip, Shockley is acting like he doesn't get racial disparities and why the racial disparities exist. They were intentional disparities created for black people. So I was watching a video earlier when I was preparing for the show, I was watching a video earlier, and Thomas Sowell was talking about the creation of like the different classes of black people, the elite blacks versus the regular blacks, right? And so one of the things that he was talking about was a lot of the elite blacks were the offspring. It began with them being the offspring of the masters. And so that created the mulatto class. So you have the mulatto class versus the Negro class. And it was a distinct difference between the mulattoes and the Negroes. And the mulattoes had access to resources and information that the Negroes didn't. So the mulattoes, especially if they were free blacks and mulattoes who became free blacks, they had more access. And it was a bit easier for the mulattoes than it was for those who were like me, like the regular Negroes, right? So we're talking about access to resources and information. So the mulattoes had a significantly had a significant advantage over the regular Negroes. Imagine what the whites had, because the whites were in a position of power and authority, right? With all of the resources, right? And remember, racism was created to help maintain economic and political power, right? And so when we're talking about access to education, remember, to go to college is a privilege no matter who you are. I realized that I am privileged to have two parents that both have graduated from college and were able to create the opportunity for me and my other brothers to go to college and graduate college. So we are privileged. The average American or the average black person don't have that. Most black people don't go to college, right? Most black people don't have the access. It's genetic, well, not genetic, but it's generational disparities that America created because America intentionally put blockades in the place of black people to keep us at a subservient place, keep us at a place where we will be dependent upon others, and that will make self-sufficiency even more difficult, but not impossible, but more difficult. But black people showed that self-sufficiency is possible, right? And so racism was justified to the free labor of enslaved Africans enriching European and American economies. It divided poor Europeans and enslaved Africans to prevent class-based uprisings in colonial America. Laws created a racial caste system, giving poor white people more rights than enslaved Africans to keep them loyal to white elites. And if they had it, the mulattoes had it as well. It allowed colonial governments to exploit labor and natural resources in Africa, Asia, and Latin America under the guise of racial superiority. Then when you come to America, of the black people being in that system of control, or the system of chattel slavery, the system of white supremacy, right? Remember, race became a tool of social order determining who could vote, who could own land, who had access to education, healthcare, and justice, and who was considered fully human. The system of white supremacy controlled that. By embedding racial hierarchies into law, religion, education, and medicine, societies ensured the continued marginalization of black populations. They controlled who had access to education, healthcare, and justice, who were considered fully human, who could own land, and who could vote, things that could put black people in a position to win. The white supremacists controlled that. Black people are not genetically inferior. We're not genetically like unintelligent. Remember, it was one time illegal for us to read. And it's been instilled in us that the reading won't help us. We've been pushed toward the things that don't matter, the fancy things that shine doesn't matter. We've been socially engineered to be the Negroes. Remember that. They socially engineered us to be the Negroes, then turn around and act like they didn't do it.
could be, you could turn it around the other way, where you could have very large numbers of black people who are exposed to educational opportunities like white people, who are exposed to housing, who are exposed to health facilities. Why don't you explain that at the same time that you put figures like that?
I'm sure you would explain it,
no, but
Dr.
I think
Welsing,
it's important
but
in
one must say first things first. And you've raised the basic question there, and that is whether the disadvantages are primarily a lack of opportunity or whether they are primarily a basic genetic difference. And let me mention one thing, which is that in certain areas there is no doubt about black superiority. Blacks are superior in visual acuity, and they're superior in a systematic way. Now, I don't expect that people will understand the details of this, but I simply want to show that quantitative work can be done. This happens to be a research job of my own. And what it shows, because these points that you see here lie on a line, which is not the central line, but they lie systematically on a line, what it says is that so far as visual acuity is concerned, blacks are systematically better than whites. It's as if their bell-shaped curve, their distribution curve, were pushed upwards compared to whites for visual acuity, or at least for the avoidance of bad eyesight, such that if the same shift occurred for IQ, it would mean that the average IQ distribution would be up by 9 points rather than down by about 15 points, which is the typical average.
Dr. Shockley, visual acuity is probably something that the system of white supremacy has not necessarily seen the need to affect the environment that black people are in so that it will alter the fact that they have visual acuity that is superior to whites. The fact of visual acuity is not attacked in the same way as educational opportunity and job performance is attacked. And I think that
it's evidence for a genetic difference, in my opinion.
Well, you see what I'm saying? There might be...
Well, I mean, there's a difference in the argument of genetic differences and genetic inferiority, right? Genetic differences exist, but to say that these genetic differences are inferior or superior to each other is the problem. And that's the road that Shockley is going down, because, hey, a genetic difference is my skin is darker than a white person's skin. A white person's skin is lighter than my skin. Those are genetic differences. Brown eyes, blue eyes, blonde straight hair, black curly hair. Genetic differences exist. There are other genetic differences that exist, but that doesn't mean that my hair is better than their hair or their hair is better than my hair, right? Yes, we know genetic differences exist. Don't insult our intelligence. But the fact that you're trying to shape these differences into a narrative of better or worse, or genetic traits that are needed, genetic traits that are not needed, genetic traits that show superiority, or genetic traits that show inferiority. That's the disingenuous thing that Shockley is doing, and he can go to hell for that.
Many, many more genetic differences where people of color appear superior.
If I may, we have a number of people, and we'd like to get to as many as possible. And if you could make your answers as, not to compromise your explanation, but if you could make your answers as succinct, I would appreciate it, because we would like to involve the public as much as we can. One moment, please. Your Unbacked Journal, go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if Dr. Shockley could explain the basic difference between the course he is taking in explaining white supremacy and the course that Hitler took during the Nazism reign.
Thank you.
Well, there are enormous differences. In fact, the lesson to be learned from Nazi history is frequently very misunderstood. And it is a lesson which Mr. Brown has told us about earlier. It's the First Amendment. It's not that eugenics is intolerable. Actually, the eugenic programs, which are the opposite of dysgenics, eugenic programs are not inconceivable. They're not inhumane. Denmark has been carrying out programs with strong eugenic implications for maybe 30 years. And it's important to note that since World War II, Denmark's per capita homicide rate dropped and is now approximately 1/20th. That is, the number of deaths of probability of being killed in a year by a violent homicide is roughly the order of 100 times less for young Danes than it is for young American blacks.
Can I?
Now, but the lesson, let me say what the lesson of Nazi history we have in this country, and it will protect us. It's just the thing that makes this program possible. The First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. If one believes that is not the right answer, then one has to be one of the most anti-German racists there can be. If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
I'd like to comment because I'd like to say that I don't think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shockley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shockley is fully aware of what he is doing and why he is doing what he's doing. But the long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans. Number two, he was aware that the Semites had genetically dominant material, genetic material to the Aryans. And if we begin to understand the way that people who were in Europe at the time that the Semites arrived from Africa, when the Semites arrived in Europe from Africa, they were people who had substantial amounts of color and who had very kinky hair because they were from the continent of Africa. And the Europeans, the white people who were there, had a reaction, a color reaction to the Semites that is no different than the reaction and the concern on the part of people who are white in this area of the world or any other area of the world to people who have the genetic capacity to produce color, who can genetically annihilate their position. And I think it's very, very important, even though Dr. Shockley, I am convinced that Dr. Shockley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
So, yes, everything she said, hell yeah. And I'm going to add my piece, right? Because he does, he's espousing rhetoric similar to what Hitler did espouse, right? Like she said, the act of spreading propaganda against a group of people is negative propaganda to say that this group of people is a subspecies of human. And then this propaganda is also followed up with the idea of practicing eugenics, so we can clean up the race like the Danes did, or like the whites did, the Europeans did, to clean up their race. Because he's speaking about eugenics as if it's something that should happen and should be employed on black people, because those dirty Negroes need to be cleaned up. So we've proven that they're inferior. We've proven that they're stupid. We're proving that they're subhuman. So let's get rid of a number of them, because, I mean, they're not on our level. And if they're not on our level, then they don't deserve to live. I mean, look at them. Look at their nappy hair. Look at their dark skin. Look at their nose, their lips. Look at the protruding buttocks, like all those features that the Africans have. Look at those features. Look at those negative features, right? And remember, this is the propaganda that led us to having the self-hate that we have for ourselves today. This is the propaganda that led us to the infighting that we have amongst ourselves today. This is the propaganda that led us to hate what we see when we look in the mirror, right? He ain't smart at all. Shockley ain't smart at all. And you can tell that he don't know what the hell he talking about. And he just did some research, did some half-ass research, and decided to jump out the window. And he jumped out the window and fell on his ass, because the idea just off of, hey, I created these charts to say that black people, and according to these charts now that I have in my hand, black people are less human than white people. And see, the chart said, right, with no real evidence to back up what he's saying and no experience in the field to have any credibility, no credentials, no credibility. But he's a white man espousing eugenic and racist rhetoric, and the white media decided to push it. Yes, it's systematically accompanied. Systematically accompanied, right? Hey, you talking bad about, you talking about them black folk, you talking about the black folk not being human. We got a platform for you. We got a platform for you because the system supports it. The system is about the maintenance of itself. And anybody that's pushing information that can help the system maintain itself, it will be supported.
I would like to ask a question, and Dr. Shockley, if you could answer it yes or no, I would appreciate it. Do you believe that black people are inferior in intelligence because of their heredity?
I have a standard statement. It is not yes or no. It's memorized. I say at the same time every time I think. What I say is this. My research leads me, and it's a tragic conclusion really, my research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not...
So that means yes, he believes we are genetically deficient. Yes, he does.
Not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
All right, if you believe that the position relatively of black Americans to white Americans is based on a genetic inferiority, and I will accept the responsibility for that word, then what do you see as the solution to the problem?
Well, I see the first aspect of this is to prevent the problem from becoming worse by dysgenics. This first word
would
that
you
I
translate
mentioned.
Dysgenics for me and the audience? Would that be sterilization?
No. Dysgenics, you see, means what that other chart I showed you says.
Should blacks,
the least effective element.
Should blacks be sterilized?
No. I have a...
this but if blacks are a problem and we do not allow...
This is inhumane. And I think one can find more humane solutions to this.
Well, then how would... Then
I would propose something in which one of the key phrases, is regardless of sex, race, or welfare status. And this is the proposal. I call it a thinking exercise. It's mentioned in that pamphlet that I showed that you can obtain. And it goes this way, that you would offer a bonus to everyone to be sterilized. Now, we know we have a population explosion problem. We know that in India that bonuses in the form of transistor radio...
Yeah, Dr. Welsing was right. Basically, voluntary sterilization. Because if they sterilize themselves, if they come up with the idea that they need to be sterilized, they can't blame it on us. All we did is help them help themselves, because they realized that the dysgenics was running rampant within their race. And so they took the option to clean up their race and sterilize themselves so they won't keep reproducing more of those crazy Negroes.
Would this bonus be directed to black people specifically, more than whites?
Mr. Brown, what did I say just a moment ago? I said, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status.
Now there is a group.
That's what I say.
There is a group of white people to whom this offer should be made also.
Absolutely. Now the offer is based upon the best estimates, best scientific estimates that one can have of any genetically carried disabilities. Now there are some, I think, that any humane person would have no doubt about. And Dr. Welsing talked about dominant and recessive genes. I want to point out that sometimes...
So is he trying to, is he also alluding that blackness is a genetic disability?
A dominant gene can be a very bad thing, and it is a very bad thing for a neurological disease called Huntington's chorea, which is something like multiple sclerosis.
Which is more prominent in white people than black people.
That is correct, and I think that one should offer a large bonus for anyone who might be potentially carrying Huntington's chorea.
Dr. Shockley,
beyond this, it goes on with some other...
See, Shockley trying to clean it up, because Shockley's trying to make it seem like he's talking about in the broad sweep of across the races, across the genders, and all those things there. But we know he's pinpointing that to black people because he's already stated that he thinks black people are genetically inferior, and we need to clean up our genetic pool.
Other factors in this, but Dr. Welsing wishes to speak.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color, than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised, and I think blacks apparently have higher heart problems.
Would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general.
Go ahead, your Black Journal, please.
What we know about ancient black civilizations, how can American blacks suddenly be genetically regressive?
Thank you.
Let me just say this. What is very interesting is in the study of biology, biologists who have studied evolution, one of the very interesting things that they say is that the more functional skin pigment cells in the animal kingdom, the higher you are on the scale of phylogenetic ascension. In other words, nature in the course of evolution went to its highest state when it produced a cell that could produce pigment, and that we were sliding backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution. Are you aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
No, I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic.
Of course he ain't aware of it because he ain't a real geneticist. He an armchair geneticist who just so happened to be white at the right time.
Difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets longer and longer the more advanced the animal is, and that is one of the items on the racial difference, that the neurological development of blacks is faster than whites. Black babies walk on the average a month earlier than white babies, and the period of
black
gestation...
people are much more creative also than white
Dr. Wells, Shockley, correct me if I'm incorrect. Didn't the Giselle schedule, which tested the intelligence of children, make a correlative between intelligence and walking early?
Yes.
And I would think it probably would have been negative.
No, it was not. It was positive.
Well,
he don't know what he's talking about. Like, at this point, we've already established he don't know what he's talking about. He's dead wrong. I tell people all the time, don't go into public willing to die on the hill for something that you don't really know what the hell you talking about. That's what William Shockley is doing. He don't know what the hell he's talking about, but he's out there. And he's just hell-bent on proving that the maturation of black people has created something dysfunctional. And this dysfunctional being keeps reproducing itself. And that's why this dysfunctional being needs to be sterilized based off the pseudoscience that he's come across. Because he a dumbass. And you could tell him I said it.
The motor skills on the Giselle schedule indicated that earlier precocious walking children, there was a correlation between that and high intelligence.
This may be true. It might be true within a group. I'm not sure of that.
Well, maybe
I know that there is a correlation in terms of things earlier than walking. At the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top, at the first 6 months, they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment and who don't go as far. But so there are a number of these things certainly to be brought in.
Fine.
But
Giselle schedule is a very authentic, accepted, institutional psychological experiment.
And so is the Nancy Bailey early test.
I'd like to take another call at this point. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello. This question is addressed to Dr. Welsing. First, I would like to say that Mr. Brown and Dr. Welsing disprove immediately Dr. Shockley's concept, because here we have two highly intelligent, gifted people. And by getting this out of the way, Dr. Welsing, wouldn't you agree that there is a strong genetic component to the inheritance of intelligence? Geneticists believe that 80% the component is hereditary. Let me finish, Dr. Welsing. And then also, I think the association of skin color with intelligence is an erroneous concept, and I want your views on this. Isn't it true that the historic fate of black people, the tragic deprivation, the conditions under which they were raised, any people raised under these conditions will have an hereditary, evolutionary background, which could lead to poor capacity to generalize, to conceptualize, to be creative in the form field of ideas, and develop other excellent attributes. Now, this is not a racist idea. This could happen to any group who has a tragic history of the black people.
Thank you.
No, I do not feel that there's any evidence to suggest that 80% of the ability to come to terms with your environment that has to do with heredity. I think that much of it has to do with the environmental opportunity that the genetic material is exposed to.
Right.
I think that if we look at the black people, if we just take the black group, and we look at those people who have been able to achieve, and we look at their backgrounds, we will find that they have had substantial social and economic opportunities that maybe some of the segment of the black population has not had. We'll find the same thing in the white group. Those white people who have been socioeconomic.
Right. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Thomas Sowell video about the mulatto and the Negroes, about the mulattoes being exposed to more and having more access to opportunities and resources than the Negroes, which would give them an upper hand to do better and have better outcomes. If you're exposed to more, you're going to have better, you're going to have an opportunity to have better outcomes. It's just up to you to take advantage of it. If I'm exposed to less, it's going to be a lot harder.
Economically deprived and at the bottom of the economic scale for whites, that these people are not performing in the same way that people who have extended socioeconomic opportunity. One of the very interesting things is that white women are now talking about women's liberation, and they are looking at their performance relative to white men, and they are saying, and all of the spokesmen for white women, and men and women are also saying, that the reason that the white woman has less confidence in her performance and is not performing as well, relatively speaking, as the white male has been the attitudes within the white family as to the role of the woman versus the role of the man. Now, what is interesting is that when white people are looking at the difference in the performance of the white woman and the white man on IQ tests, they can account for that on the basis of environmental influences. However, when they shift over into looking at whites relative to people of color, somehow they want to drop that understanding and that awareness.
It's been interesting.
We ain't stupid. We ain't falling for the banana in the tailpipe. You're not going to tell me that I'm genetically inferior, that I am not intelligent because of my race. No, it's not doing that. You're not going to continue to spew the propaganda. But this is some of the great work of the legendary, the iconic Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. If you don't have a book, the ISIS Papers, you tripping. Link is in the description where you can get your copy of the ISIS Papers. But I wanted to bring that to you, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing against Dr. William Shockley. William Shockley pushing the idea of black genetic and intellectual inferiority, and started off with the clip of the gentleman talking about that in his book, highlighting the ideas of black inferiority when it comes to intelligence. We're not less intelligent than any other group of people. You give us all the resources and all the opportunities that you give anybody else, and watch what happens. We already know what happens when you give a black person an even playing field against people of any other walk of life. We see how we excel. It has happened over and over and over. Like one of the callers pointed out, the fact that Shockley is sitting on that panel with Tony Brown and Dr. Welsing, two highly intelligent individuals, shows that his theory is wrong. Because according to him, black people shouldn't be intelligent. We should all be stupid. But they show him that, hey man, you just talking and you just have the ability to push your stupid ass propaganda. But we're going to keep fighting back. And that's how we do it, man. So good video, good breakdown, good thing that we got going on. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I had fun myself. So go ahead and Have a great Saturday. Remember to like this video. Hit that like button if you haven't. If you made it this far, you are one of the greatest of all time. I appreciate you. Hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share, tell other people about this. You get that super like button, all that stuff. You can become a member of the channel. We getting it in over here on the Shoulders of Giants. We growing and we glowing. We're at 71K. Thank you to everybody who helped me get to 71K subscribers. We're pushing to 100K by the end of the year. I know y'all can help me, so let's continue to do this. Enjoy your Saturday. I love you all. I'm out here country style. We getting it in.